Today, we're getting real and raw about the emotions you might feel about your body when gaining weight to build muscle and getting a little fluffy on the way. I'm going unscripted today to share my personal journey regarding my body image so that you'll gain some insights and strategies to help you navigate these challenges. Tune in for an honest, heartfelt conversation about embracing strength inside and out. Wits and Weights community, welcome to another solo episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today, I'm doing something completely different. I am going raw. I am going real. I am going mostly unscripted. And by mostly, anyone who knows me knows that I could never do something like this completely without thought or planning whatsoever. But I assure you, if you were looking at my notes in front of me, they're extremely minimal. Usually, I spend quite a bit of time preparing an outline, references, side notes, quotes, things like that. And today is a little more unscripted. And what I wanted to do was talk about the feelings that I've had and the experience that I've had while gaining a little extra weight during a muscle building phase. Now, there's nothing super unique about this phase versus the last few times I did this, but these things recur, right? They come up again. And a lot of the things I feel and experience are very common among my clients and individuals I've spoken to. And they're the fears. A lot of them are fears of those of you who've never gone through a muscle building phase before. And this topic comes up time and time again because we talk about how important it is to build muscle. And yet, if you've got, let's say, 20 or 30 pounds to lose, and by that, I mean, you're kind of carrying a little extra weight and you don't feel great in your body and you don't feel comfortable in your clothes. And so you think logically the next step is to lose weight. Even if you do it the quote unquote right way and lose primarily fat and hold on to muscle because you're eating protein, you're strength training and all of that, you may still feel like that's the direction you have to go because then you'll feel better and you'll be in a good place and a good level of leanness from which to build muscle. Now, that's not necessarily a false thing. We have clients who the first thing we do after the pre-diet phase is go into a fat loss phase. We might lose 10, 15, 20 pounds, maybe more if they're bigger, and then build muscle. And we'll tend to work together for maybe 9, 12 months or longer because it takes that much time to go through these full phases. However, if you're not excessively overweight from a health perspective and you don't mind about being in the body you're in for a little while longer, I think there's a lot of benefit to building muscle first, just because of the downstream effects of having that extra muscle for your health, but also for your ability to lose fat later and become leaner and get the body you're really going for and the physique you're going for, but possibly at a much higher weight on the scale. In other words, it makes scale weight less important, which is the end goal here because we don't want to be focusing on just that number. Now, I'm saying all this because the biggest fear people have, even if they have gone through a fat loss phase, is I'm going to gain all this weight back and I'm not going to look great. I'm not going to like my body. And it seems like it's going to take a while because it takes time to build muscle. And the answer is yes, yes, yes. Like those feelings are valid that you may not love the body you're in, but also remember that to get where you want to go requires some trade-offs in the meantime to get something else. And that something else is the strength and the muscle required to build up that physique that you're looking for, that defined, toned, lean, whatever physique. So I've come to terms with this over the years, and I was lucky. I was lucky because the first time I ever built muscle properly, and you may have heard me talk about this on other podcasts, I gained a lot of weight in the process because I wasn't tracking my nutrition and I was just indiscriminately eating and drinking. And by drinking, I mean lots of whole milk. In all my shakes, I had whole milk. And I was just eating a lot of food, including a lot of processed food, junk food, whatnot. Not a lot of fiber, not a lot of fruits and vegetables, just maybe with dinner when my wife would cook that for me, but I wouldn't include a lot otherwise, thinking that I just needed to gain tons of mass. Now, on the plus side, I realized how helpful that was to building muscle and strength because all my lifts doubled or tripled in that first novice progression I went through. Would they have gone up as much without eating as much? I have no idea because I haven't gone through it. But I know from working with clients that if you're at maintenance or if you're not eating in much of a surplus, it's going to be harder and you are going to build muscle at a slower rate. So having gone through that, it sort of got lucky in that I gained a bunch of weight at the time, not on purpose or not in spite of my fears, but just because I thought that's what I had to do and I did it. I realized then, ooh, I wasn't thrilled with how much extra fat I had put on. And that's what led me to my first fat loss phase. And I did that. And that probably took 16, 20, maybe 24 weeks. It was rather drawn out because I was kind of learning the ropes at the time and I didn't have a coach. If you have a coach, you can do it much more efficiently and effectively with all the plateaus on the way, you know how to get through them. But I got through that fat loss phase, got down to fairly lean level. And then I went through several muscle building and cutting phases since then, each time learning a ton more about my body, but also realizing that there are patterns that repeat themselves. And one of those is that as I'm gaining weight, when I'm, say, 4 or 5 months into a 6 to 12 month building phase, I start to get uncomfortable with my body in several ways, physically and visually. And I've learned to embrace that. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about today. And you notice this is totally unscripted, not polished. I'm not sharing reviews on the podcast. I'm not, giving you a call to action or anything like that. Just going to jump right into today's episode. And there's a reason I call it what I'm calling it. And that is why I'm getting fluffy before I get jacked. Okay, that's the name of the episode. My motivation is for wanting to gain weight and muscle mass is to continue to be strong, capable, confident, to be able to walk into a room and people kind of turn their heads like, whoa, that guy is an outlier, to be able to be, the fittest guy on the beach, all of this. And look, I'm in my 40s. I didn't start this until I was almost 40. And some of you are wondering, well, can I even do this at X age, 40, 45, 50, 55? The answer is yes. If you've never done anything like this, if you've never lifted properly, followed your nutrition, gone through cuts or bulks, or even a proper maintenance phase, you can still do it at any age and get massive progress and results. But the biggest sticking point for so many people is the building muscle phase because it takes time. And by time, I mean at least 6 months. Okay. It takes time. Now, if you were to work with me for, say, 6 months in my coaching program and you said, hey, I love this message about building muscle. I'm willing to give it a go. I'm willing to even gain a little fat in the process, but I also want to lose fat. First, I would say, what's most important to you? But then I would say, okay, we can actually break this up to do both. And we're just going to compress the timelines to be less optimal. So we'll spend probably a month with the maintenance phase, getting the habits down, the training, the consistency, then 3 months or so, or maybe even, yeah, three months or so building muscle. Okay. And then a month and a half or so in a fat loss phase. And then we come out of that into maintenance. So you're kind of compressing everything. Now, if you have a year to work with, you can think of a year in terms of seasons and periods of nutrition. And once you've done this, say once or twice, you can start to synchronize your muscle building and fat loss phases with the season, and where you're dieting at most 2, maybe 3 months out of the year, but more likely 2. And then you're building or at maintenance the other 10 months. And the dieting phases are lined up with where you want to become the leanest for the year, which for a lot of people is the summertime, right? Or the beach weather, or the time, warm weather when you're not wearing as many clothes. So if you think about that timing, that means that 10 months out of the year, so let's say theoretically from late summer to the following spring, all through the holidays, all through the cold winter months, and when you tend to eat a lot as well, all that time is at least at maintenance calories or building muscle. And if your goal is to become leaner and develop a better physique and push your PRs in the gym and train effectively and feel great while doing it all, I'm going to strongly encourage that you build muscle, which means you want to be in a calorie surplus. Now, that calorie surplus is not going to be massive. It's going to be the amount of surplus that allows you to gain, if you're a male, probably 2 to 3 pounds a month. If you're a female, probably 1 to 2 pounds a month. Now do the math. We're going to go with females here because I'm going to be honest, women who make up about 2/3 of my client base and probably my podcast listeners are also the ones that tend to express the most fear about gaining too much weight during this process. I tend to have less men doing that, even though some do, because a lot of men are like, yeah, whatever, I'll put on the belly. And there's a little bit of a double standard out there as well. Let's be honest, of how people are judged for that, better or worse, perception or not. All of that. Okay. And I'm not going to get into the politics of all body image stuff, but where I was going with this is if you're a female and I say, hey, let's let's build muscle for 10 months at, even if it's 1 pound a month, we'll do the math, that's 10 pounds of weight gain. And if you are like a 150-pound female, that might seem like a lot. Like 10 pounds of weight gain is a lot, especially if you think in your head your quote unquote ideal weight is, say, 130. Well, aren't we going the other direction? And so I'm going to throw in a few caveats to that, right, to try to convince you. But one of those is going to be, of those 10 pounds you gain, if you're a newer lifter, half of that or more is going to be muscle. And then you only then have 4 or 5 pounds of fat to then lose, which will take no time at all. And now you get in this cycle of like, okay, that's interesting. So I could be spending most of the year eating a lot of food, feeling great in the gym, getting stronger, my lifts going up, getting more sleep, having less systemic chronic stress because I have this beautiful like acute stressors of being in the gym and lifting heavy, and all of this, and my hormones are fully firing in optimal modes. Are you going to take that, right? Like, and that's part of the sales pitch, so to speak. For one of the things I'm going to go through throughout this episode is like getting back to focus on the positives, focusing on the positives of what we're getting out of this. So I might ramble a little bit in the show, but hopefully not, because it's just you and me, right? You, the listener, and me, we're having a conversation. Imagine your favorite beverage in your hand or whatever activity you're doing. And just, we're having it, and think about the fears and the scenarios that I bring up and whether they relate to you, and then what we can do about them. So back to sort of my personal experience with this. You might have seen me or heard me joke about the power belly. I talk about it with my lifting buddies and clients as well. It's usually guys that are talking about that. And we talk about the power belly, and that is just having more abdominal fat, which men tend to have more abdominal fat, women tend to have more in the thighs, but everyone's a little different. And I know for me personally, like the first thing to go when I start gaining weight is my abs. And honestly, I didn't have them for my whole life until a few years ago anyway. So I'm cool with that, knowing that I can get them back. And so the power belly is just that you're starting to get this abdominal fat, and correlated with that is your lifts all start going up. And so you're more powerful, you're more strong, you're able to push more. You can think of it as like powerlifting belly, right? Like, okay, I've got a power belly, but I'm hitting PRs on my deadlift. So hell yeah, right? so that it's part of the muscle building process, right? Now, that's not to say that I don't every day look in the mirror and think, oh man, I'm like months away from seeing my abs. Like I've got, I'm soft, right? And we see that about ourselves. We're soft. I posted a photo of myself doing my best to try to get in just the right angle and show off a little bit of bicep, where I've got no definition whatsoever because everything's covered in fat. And if you look at some of the really strong bodybuilders or lifters who've been doing this for many years, when they go into a building phase, if you look at their photos at the end of their phases, they've lost a ton of definition. All right. And you rarely see those photos because it doesn't sell on social media, right? You rarely see those. So the picture that you're fed on social media of people who are jacked and ripped all the time is 100% false. Let's just put it that way. That is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of people who look that way, first of all, and the algorithm is just showing those to you. And secondly, you can only look that way at your leanest, at practically an unhealthy level of leanness. Now, there is a healthy level of leanness that you can walk around with after you've built muscle for, say, 5 to 10 years, and you've gotten closer to genetic potential, and you're fairly lean, but not super lean, that anyone I've ever met would be completely thrilled with to be at that point. And I think that's what we're trying to get. It's what they call lifestyle lean. And yet, even with that, if you don't spend some time in a surplus, gaining some body fat and losing a little bit of that definition, you're not going to maximize the speed at which you build them. And you might be okay with that. So you might be okay taking the next 15 years to try to slowly build muscle. But a lot of people I've met would rather build, say, 80% of their potential muscle. I'm just throwing a number out there, over the next 2 or 3 years, then take 10, 15 years to maybe get there, right? And then over the next 2 to 3 years, you're making some sacrifices in terms of your body fatness. Okay. So there are these complex feelings we have about body image. And I definitely hear that a lot more from women than men, but I have them. The men I talk to have them as well. And there's also a sort of a different backlash out there where very strong lifters will make fun of or joke around with people who are trying to lose body fat and saying like, hey, don't, you're skinny, man. You're too skinny. Like people will say that. And that's a similar form of quote unquote body shaming. Now, I personally don't, I find it hilarious because the people I hang out with, we joke with each other and we know we're doing that and it's all good. But if anyone listening who knows someone else who is in this journey for their fitness, they're going to be at a different level of strength and muscle building and fatness and health than you. and also at a different level than other people their age, right? And if you're this person, you know who I'm talking about, where, especially if you're a woman and guys in the gym make comments about you that are just unwarranted, they're just inappropriate and they're stupid, right? They have no idea what you're going through. And by the way, and you could joke in your head, like, I bet I can, I bet I can deadlift more than that guy, right? But maybe you can't. And honestly, it doesn't, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying that that's something that, we joke around. I guess where I'm going with all this is it's very personal. And if you're listening, just know that whatever you feel is correct. And also whatever your goal is correct. And the question is how to accept all the things that go along with pursuing and achieving that goal, so that on the balance, you are uh, not in cognitive dissonance, but actually very satisfied with the choices you've made. And that's hard, because if your goal really is to get stronger and build muscle, and it takes gaining some weight in the process, you have to, and this is one of the few times I say have to, you have to accept the fact that you're going to gain weight. So the scale weight's going to go up, and that there's some body fatness that comes along for the ride. That's just a fact. But you also can recognize that there are many, 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 many benefits that go along with that before you even get to the end goal. All right. So the reason that you have to gain some fat along with muscle is simply because that's the body's storage mechanism as you are bringing in energy. It's very easy to gain fat, and you can only build new muscle tissue so quickly. So as you're training really hard, you're eating your protein, you're eating your calories. If you try to speed that up, your body can't go any faster on the muscle side, so it's going to go much faster on the fat gaining side. The counter argument to that is, well, then I'm going to stay barely above maintenance so that I don't gain any fat. But it just doesn't seem to work that way. Assume that you're going to gain half of the weight that you gain as fat. That's a good assumption. It could be even more than that if you're more advanced. But I've definitely, in my current gaining phase right now, after having done this 3 times in the past, using my rough estimates of body fat, I'm about a 50-50 right now, a 1-to-1, which is awesome. That's the best I could possibly hope for. So I want you to assume that at least half of what you're going to gain, no matter how slowly you try to go, is going to be fat. The positive about that is that you might as well then go as fast as you can go until the point where fat starts to outpace muscle. And we kind of know what that is. We know that that's around, like I said before, 2 to 3 pounds a month for men, 1 to 2 pounds for women. And so it equates to something like 0.2 to 0.3% of your body weight per week. Yeah, I think I got that right. 0.2 to 0.3% of your body weight per week on the upper end. The more advanced you are, the lower you go. So once you accept that, then it's a fact and it's logic that you're going to gain some fat to gain muscle, period. Let's just accept it. That's the first thing. Now let's keep going. Because if you're not going to accept that, then you have to accept a much, much longer road to building muscle and getting the physique you want. Then there's this dichotomy between all of these insecurities I just talked about and the societal judgments and the people making comments. By the way, get those toxic people out of your life, stay away from them, or give them a piece of your mind. Like, tell them, hey, this is wrong. Stop making comments about my body. Like, this is not appropriate. And if you're in a gym setting, go talk to the manager, go talk to the instructor, right? Anyway, there are the insecurities of what happens when your body shape changes, especially because the place that we usually dislike the most is the place where fat goes to first. And that's not coincidence. It's because we are used to the fact that that's the fattest part of our bodies. And so we've tied that to our overall body image. And so it kind of is a vicious cycle, right? So you take those insecurities, but then you take the confidence and the positives about getting physically stronger and building muscle. And we know that changing your body composition for the better can improve your self-image, can improve your confidence. And so one of the things that comes to mind is there a way to still exude and embrace that confidence that comes from knowing you're stronger, you're bigger in a good way, there's muscle there, right? You're filling in your shirts, the shirts are getting a little tighter, but it's not like in the past just because you were getting fat. It's because those muscles are starting to pop, right? You're creating this marble sculpture underneath this little layer of fat that's going to just be there, ready to get revealed when you carve out the fat. And yes, you're going to have emotional ups and downs throughout this, but coming back to the positive of embracing the bigger, stronger body and what you're able to do with that body, not just in the gym, but in real life. Maybe you can help somebody like moving furniture around. One of my clients said that she had to put something in the car. She went with her husband to Home Depot or something and put something big in the car. And she was like, whoa, it was super easy. I had no idea I'd be able to just like chuck it over there. And she's in a building phase and she's bigger and stronger. Right. So that's one thing that comes to mind. See, I told you this would be unscripted because I have some minimal notes here I'm trying to get through, but I'm trying to address each of the things that I relate to. Another thing is the challenges when you're bulking include kind of the reverse of what happens when you're losing fat, which is you hit plateaus. So when you're losing fat, we all know we hit a weight loss or fat loss plateau, we get stuck and we're not sure why, right? And we've talked about that in the past. I'm not going to rehash all the reasons why, but we have the same reasons the other direction, where when you're trying to bulk or lean bulk, whatever term you want to use, you're going to hit plateaus along the way for a variety of reasons. And the reason I bring that up here with the whole insecurity discussion about getting fluffy is because number one, when you hit those plateaus, you feel like it's going to take longer. And now you're like, oh, now I have to be fluffy for longer. Like, come on, let's build, let's build, let's build. And you know for sure if you're in a plateau, if along with the scale weight plateau, your lifts all of a sudden that week seem like they're harder. Like obviously you should be progressing anyway, but sometimes the progression to the next level feels a lot harder than the last time. And sometimes it feels easier. You know what I'm talking about. And oftentimes that's correlated with your metabolism ramping up and you not eating enough to keep up with it. Even if you're using MacroFactor, which I highly recommend to everyone listening, best app on the market for this. In fact, the only one that can get you to precisely bulk at just the right rate so you don't gain too much fat, but you also don't accidentally go into a diet. And if you use MacroFactor, of course, use my code, Wits and Weights, all one word. That's my only plug today. All right. So if you're using MacroFactor, even then, what I often see, and tell me if this isn't true with you in your head, of course, because this is a one-way conversation right now, that you hit these plateaus on the scale and sometimes your weight even goes down and you're like, what is going on? I'm eating, whatever it might be. I'm eating 2,600 or I'm eating 3,000 or I'm eating 3,200 calories a day. Okay. And I'm still not gaining. Well, what's probably happening is if you look at your expenditure chart, it's probably increasing pretty quickly. And MacroFactor doesn't want to be over responsive. It's conservative. And so if you're working with me as a client and we see that, and I recognize it as a true plateau, we will simply get ahead of it by eating more. And I know that sounds like, oh, that's an easy solution. But when you know your expenditure and you know that the weight stall is because the expenditure is going up and no other variables have changed, that's excellent information to make a decision to eat more without the risk that, oh, I'm going to gain a bunch of body fat because I'm going past the rate that Philip just talked about of like the 1-to-1. And so by doing that, you can get out of the plateau pretty quickly by being proactive and upping those calories as it ramps up. So one of the big challenges, and I talked about this on the hard gaining phase, is just eating more and more and more and more. And then that correlating with your feeling of fluffiness or being bloated or being a little bit uncomfortable because your stomach is always full, basically, or maybe you have a little bit more digestive issues because now you're just eating so much more. Maybe you have more processed food, maybe you have more or less fiber, right? We know the deal. Eating a lot of food has its own challenges. And so you correlate that with being fluffy. You're like, I feel like a slob, right? Like I just blah. I feel like blah. Okay. I know how that feels. And it's like, am I doing the right thing by eating so much? Like, is this okay that I'm eating? And yet at the end of the day, you're not, unless you're over consuming by thousands and thousands of calories, if you're tracking, you're still going to stay within that correct ballpark to get through the plateau and make progress, but not do it so fast that you gain too much fat. Right. That makes sense. So I kind of wanted to address that piece of it because a lot of people will give up. Like they get to these things and they think, am I just pushing myself to be like too fat? Am I just pushing myself out there? And this is disgusting. Like, what am I doing? Right. These doubts that we have. I've been through it enough times now to know that I'm going to hit these sticking points maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times in a, say, 8-month building cycle. It'll happen quite a bit. And I actually just went through, I think I'm coming through one right now. And every time it happens, here's how we spin it around. Here's how we reframe it. Instead of saying, oh, that's disgusting. What am I going to do? Blah, blah, blah. Embrace the fact that, oh, you know what? I could even eat more this week. Now, you might not think of that as a positive because if you're already hitting 3,200, 3,400, 3,600 calories and you're getting a little tired of it, that's a different issue we need to talk about. Because if you're at the point where you're 7, 8, 9 months into a building phase and you just are sick of eating, we don't want to be in that mental state. Like physiological, we don't want to be there. And it's probably time to come out of that. But assuming you're not there yet, we can embrace the positive like I just did this week. And I said, all right, well, I guess I need to not you need to, but I'm going to overshoot my calories by maybe 1 to 200 every day. And I know it's going to be fine because I'm trying to break through a plateau right now. All right. So enough about that one. What else? Okay. So as we go through this building phase, you're going to have lots of self-talk. You're going to have this internal narrative about how your body's changing. You might even say like, what happened? I did all this hard work to get my diet under control and this flexible dieting approach I'm tracking. I'm strength training really hard. Maybe I even went through a fat loss phase and got some leanness and definition where I wanted to be, and now I feel like I'm throwing it all the way. This is where I think some combination of self-care and coping with the mental aspects of this is going to be important. And so what does that mean? So first of all, we want to have realistic goals, right? That's one thing that comes to mind is assuming we're going at a reasonable rate of gain and we know that we're following an effective program and we're lifting more and more each session. Okay, those goals are the ones that we want to go after, not the a year from now I'm going to be leaner, because that's too vague and it's too far away. So I would rather you focus on performance, 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 and not aesthetics. Even though my comment earlier was that there is a way to embrace your fluffier aesthetics, especially when you have a shirt on and you just look bigger and stronger. Now I know this is different between men and women, but ladies, when you've got those bigger thighs because you're building all that muscle, that's something you can embrace. Or maybe it's the back, right? Like whatever it is for you. Okay, for me, it's like, having kind of broader shoulders, bigger biceps, kind of a big, strong back. Now, again, if I took my shirt off, I would feel more insecure because I've got a little extra fluff. But then I'm like, so what? I'm big and strong. This is going to pay off later. However, that's a little piece of it. The rest of it is performance, is this holistic view of, wow, I am able to go to the gym every single session and get more out of my workouts each time, over and over and over and over again. And if you're doing a building phase the right way, okay, so just like my clients are focused, right? But they also have a plan, and we're able to adapt and use that data that we're tracking to adjust each week. Assuming you have that and you know that if you're coming close to stalling on a lift, there's a reason why. It's either because you're not eating enough, sleeping enough, taking enough rest periods, whatever. You can quickly adjust and keep moving. In a building phase, you quote unquote should be able to constantly make progress. Now, for a newer lifter, that might look like squatting 3 times a week and going up 5 pounds every time. As you get more advanced, that might look like your squat goes up once a week, or or twice a week, and then once a week, right? Or maybe you get an extra set in each week and then you reset to a higher weight and get a more set. Whatever it is, you get what I'm saying. It's progressive overload, but you should be able to constantly progress. That is the sign you're getting stronger and building muscle. If that plateaus or regresses, that is where you get concerned and look at what's happening and adjust, because that's really what we're going for, right? The aesthetics and being fluffy and all that, frankly, it shouldn't matter at all, right? But I didn't want to make a podcast episode that said, just don't worry about that. Because that's not how we are as humans. So instead of worrying about that, focus on this. And this is performance and the more holistic view. Okay. The one thing I can't always address as much as maybe others can, I never really had an experience with, I'll say, disordered eating, like an eating disorder or super poor body image, like some people face when they're younger. I never was happy with my physique. I always thought I was either a little bit fat or a little bit skinny fat, and I simply accepted that, like, I would never be able to change that. And so I guess in its own sense, that is a form of poor body image. It's like it's accepting fate and just moving on, which, for anyone who knows me, I'm a very positive person. Like, I like to reframe things. I like to think of, well, it could be worse, right? It could be worse. And so that's kind of, it gives me a sense of resilience, of mental resilience that has helped me cope over the years with these things. Whereas others might have more anxiety, disorders, depression, things like that as a response to these things, right? I'm also a male, not a female. So there's certain issues that I never had to face being a male. And I also did lots of diets over the years. So you could argue that I'm right now in the midst of making this podcast, doing some form of rationalization or denial. And in reality, every time I would go on a diet and restrict, it was me responding to some insecurity I had about my body image, right? I'll accept that for sure. If I'm just to, kind of open up my mindset to my past here and try to be more reflective of it. So if you can do the same and kind of tap into your experience with past disordered eating patterns, poor body image, and how those resurface, right? As you try to gain weight and what kind of reframing and mental shift we want to have toward the positives of why we're doing this, which is different than why you gained weight in the past. It's two different things, right? In the past, you gained weight unwillingly, unwittingly or unintentionally, probably from overconsumption, probably didn't have nearly enough protein that you needed, and probably weren't strength training effectively. You were gaining a lot of fat. Well, now the mental shift here is we are gaining a lot of muscle. Oh, and by the way, there's a little fat that comes along for right, then we're going to cut off later. So if we're going to shift it that way, it's a little bit different, isn't it? Right? And also the fact that we can't live with the societal physique ideals that are out there are first of all false, like I mentioned before, right? Where you equate a six pack abs, with your worth, which it doesn't even exist for 99.99999% of people. And instead, focus on the functional strength goals. Now, if you see somebody online who's similar to you, who's a power lifter or they lift weights and they're deadlifting way more than you at your body weight, and you're a little bit jealous of that and want to get there, take that drive and energy. Like, I'm not going to criticize you for that, right? Because I think strength and performance is a great thing to go after. Just make sure that it's realistically within your grasp for this building phase. So if you currently deadlift 185 and you're in a 6-month building phase, your target's probably not going to be 475, right? It's going to be some reasonable level, assuming, X number of pounds per session or week jump over 6 months, and, a little bit of conservatism built in there for your life. And you say, okay, this is a goal I'm going to go after. If I'm at 185 now, my goal is going to be 305, for example. I think those are great goals to have and ideals to have when you're trying to build muscle. So what else comes to mind? And by the way, reach out to me on Instagram if you find this episode helpful to you. It's very unscripted, as you can tell. And I'm almost like cringing in my own skin right now with the lack of detailed notes I have in doing this, but maybe you appreciate where I'm coming from, right? What I have found is that when you've done the first time you do this is the hardest. The second time is still hard, but a little bit less so. And then it should get easier from there. Now, you may have a different experience. This is what I've found. I do have a client I can think of in particular who went through a building phase and then a fat loss phase. She got leaner than she's ever been and was kind of on the fence about like wanting to lose more versus gain more, and was worried about gaining that extra weight back. And we got to a point after mapping out like what are the micro goals for her lifts, exactly what programming is going to be best for her, because she was kind of program hopping for a very short while there, trying to hit other goals that weren't necessarily strength focused. So what is the exact program that's going to get you there in the next 6 months? How can we go at a rate of gain where the end weight on the scale doesn't really sound scary, but it's big enough to push you to gain muscle, right? And once you have all that in place, once you have a plan and goals and numbers to go after and objective measures and you're tracking your data and all that, it really does take a lot of that stress off, right? And so there's an element of patience. There's an element of knowing yourself and knowing yourself better. And by that I mean, once you've gone through it, you will know yourself better. You'll know what works and what doesn't. And what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst that's going to happen is you're going to gain a little bit extra fat than you wanted, and you're going to take an extra week or two in the fat loss phase to get it off. Think about that. If you know how to build muscle and you know how to lose fat, what's the big deal of this whole thing anyway? If I am going to give you a flippant response that sums it all up, is what does it matter anyway? You know what's going to happen. Now, you may not have the confidence because you haven't gone through this before, and I get that. And that's a lot of the people I'm speaking to, is if you've never gone through before and are just not sure and you're scared, I get it. And that's why I'm putting together this episode, just to say that I have those same fears. Like, as I sit here, I can grab my belly fat and I'm like, okay, I still am trying to gain about 5 more pounds during this building phase. And then I'm going to do a fat loss phase. But you know what? I've gone through a fat loss phase like 3 or 4 times before, and I know it works. And because I know it works, I don't have to be scared about where I am right now. All right. So I'm not sure I covered all the possible things that are in your mind about this topic. And if I didn't, again, I want you to reach out to me on IG at Wits and Weights, or you can email me, Philip with 1 L, Philip@witsandweights.com, for a conversation. Like, seriously, just say, hey, I listened to your episode. What about this? Like, you didn't cover this. Let me know. Hopefully I covered most of the big issues. I think that embracing the power belly or the power hips or whatever it is a positive way to contribute to your strength, your health, your well-being, because muscle is medicine. Muscle is primary. Muscle is the thing that is going to help you live longer, be stronger, eat more food, make fat loss easier, have even more food freedom, right? Be able to be there for your grandkids, your great grandkids, be deadlifting until you're 95. Muscle is super powerful. And if that can overwhelm any self doubts about a little bit of fat gain, then embrace it. If you're struggling with similar issues, as I've talked about today, if you're struggling with what it feels like to gain a little bit of fat along for the ride, focus on the long-term progress over the short-term look and aesthetics, but you can do it by focusing on short-term performance-focused goals that can override those doubts about your appearance. So I hope that all makes sense. It wasn't too rambly. And again, if you enjoyed the episode, if the story resonated with you in any way, if you want to chat about your experience, your fears, your goals, your strategy, if you have a question, you can always send me a message on Instagram at Wits and Weights or an email, philip@witsandweights.com. Actually, I also have an ability for you to send me a voicemail, which would be really awesome. I don't get a lot of those. I don't know if folks are afraid to use that or what, because I get a lot of questions via text, written questions. But you can go to the link in my show notes. I think it's the very last link at the bottom to leave an audio message, and I will play that message on the show and answer the question for you. Or even if it's just not a message without a question, I'll play it on the show. I always love to hear from listeners, even if you just want to say hello. And as I said before, today's episode was a little more unscripted, so that's it. That's it for today. As always, stay strong, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.